Giant Yukon Sasquatch roars in man's face as the victim sprints for cover. Russell writes RMSO. Greetings, RMSO. I'm Russell. This happened to my parents when I was just 5 months old. In 1992, my father and mother were very poor. We lived in a cottage a mile away from the small city of Mayo in Yukon, Canada. My dad was working hard, saving money so that we could get out of there and live a better life in some other city. We had a German Shepherd named Barney. He guarded the house. This all happened during the winter of 1992. It was evening and was snowstorming. My mom was in the living room with me sleeping in her arms. My dad said that he was going to the garage and fix the car axle that was slightly loose. The garage was only accessible by going outside. He left and took Barney with him. By the time he finished fixing the car and closed the garage, he noticed Barney looking out at one specific direction. Without warning, Barney ran barking in that direction, fading into the snowstorm. My father ran after him, yelling his name. He ran for about 8 yards, and then he saw a huge shadow coming in his direction, walking on 2 legs. My father told me he thought it was a bear for a second, but then as the shadow approached, he noticed it had a coned head, wide shoulders, long arms, huge hands, and massive muscles. Its entire body was covered in jet black fur, head to toe, and he saw its face that he describes as a mix of orangutan and a human. The thing stood in front of him and roared at his face. This exact moment, he sprinted to the house and locked the door. The sound was so loud that it made his ears ring. It woke me up, and I started crying. My mother asked my father what the hell was that roar. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed his shotgun and said to my mother to hide in the wardrobe with me. She managed to make me stop crying and stayed silent inside the wardrobe. My father said he looked out the window and he saw something that made him fear for our lives. He saw the creature that roared at him outside, but there was also 2 more creatures looking at the house. One was jet black, like the first one, but smaller. Dad swore that the smaller one had breasts. The third one was even taller than the other 2. It had grayish tan skin and snow white fur, but wasn't as bulky as the one that roared at him. Dad said that the creatures started to look at each other and he heard them making sounds that sounded like some kind of gibberish language. He could see their mouths were moving very fast. He estimated their size according to the trees outside. The bulky one that roared at him was around 9 feet tall. The female was about 7 feet tall. The big white one was around 11 feet tall. At this point, he stood there in the living room waiting for them to try to barge into the house. He waited for hours, and nothing happened except for the sound of little rocks being thrown at the house. The noises stopped and he saw the clock. It was showing it was 7 a.m. already. He then told my mom to lock the door behind him because he was going outside. He got outside with his shotgun and found 3 different tracks, human-like tracks. He measured one to be 53 to 55 centimeters, the other one 60 centimeters, and the other one was over 70 centimeters. He ran in the same direction Barney went and found Barney's body, 20 yards from the house. His head was smashed. He's sure that it was one of the creatures that dispatched Barney. He was a big German Shepherd, and by the look of his body, they easily put him down. Dad buried him in the yard of our property. 2 weeks after this event, my dad got enough money for us to move to the city of Whitehorse and buy a house there. We moved and lived there to this day. I'm certain that Dad saw 3 Bigfoots that day. RMSO responds. Thanks for sending your parents' sighting report and experience. 53 to 55 centimeters is around 21 inches. 60 centimeters is around 23 inches, and 70 centimeters is around 27 inches. Even the smallest one had huge feet. Do you know what your father used to measure the Bigfoot tracks? Did anyone take photos of the tracks back then? Or do you have photos of the homestead where all of this happened? Russell continues. Hi, I talked with my father about the details, and he said to me that at the time they only had enough money for food and basics. They were very poor and didn't have a camera, so he never took a photo of the house or the tracks. He measured the footprints in the snow with 2 school scales. Each one was 30 centimeters in length. He said the smaller footprints, the female, was around 53 to 55 centimeters. The footprints of the big one that roared at him were a little bit bigger. He had to use both scales together to measure 60 centimeters. And the big white one's footprints were distorted, almost like he was dragging his feet, which made the footprint look bigger than it really was. My dad measured them, and it was 70 to 80 centimeters. I believe the big one was too heavy and was dragging his feet, and this is why the footprint looked so big. My father said one more thing. The big white one looked old and was a little hunchback too. RMSO states, the big one may have had an old age related physical disability or was injured and so was dragging its leg. Sorry to hear about your poor dog Barney. This must have been a traumatic experience for your parents. I'm going to give you guys another Bigfoot report in the Yukon. This is from Outlaw Country YouTube. It was submitted to them and it's titled Bigfoot Terrorized a Prospector and His Wife, and then he has a face-to-face close encounter. I will give you a quick overview of the Sasquatch encounter report. Ernie McGregor, a 30-year resident of the Yukon, liked to prospect in gold mine with his family. On one prospecting trip with his wife in 2009 in a remote area northeast of Haines Junction, they were staying in a small canvas wall tent around 12-mile hike from where they parked their truck and ATVs. On the night of the encounter around 10 p.m., they retired to the tent for the night. It was a summer night. During that time of year, it remains light until very late. Around 1 a.m., Ernie and his wife Kim woke up to a loud hooting sound followed by a deep resonant bellow. The sound was alarmingly close, around 100 yards from their tent. This lasted off and on for several hours. The vocalizations came from two different directions, indicating at least two creatures or animals. One started to come closer to the tent and then started to make some popping or clapping noise. Ernie got out of the tent and fired some warning shots trying to scare them away, and it did. Ernie and his wife were convinced that they were being terrorized by a couple of Bigfoot. The next day, hiking back to the truck, Ernie saw something large and black moving from tree to tree for an instant, paralleling them. In 2015, when Ernie was out prospecting alone for 4 or 5 days, on one of the days when he returned to camp, it was completely destroyed. Something destroyed his tent, tossed his pot-belly camp stove about 30 feet from the tent, and had thrown other camping equipment around. He then saw human-like footprints, double the size of his own tracks. In the direction of the tracks, he saw the Bigfoot standing in the willows about 60 yards away watching them. It was around 9 to 10 feet tall, thick around as a full-grown grizzly. He was frozen in fear and could see its face clearly, mostly covered in black, short hair. Its skin was visible and its eyes sunk deep into its head. Ernie was sure he was dead man. This thing stared at him for what felt like minutes and then let out a deep, guttural grunt, then spun around and took off. When it grunted at him, he could see its dark teeth and facial expression. Ernie said it looked very human-like, a prehistoric caveman. Its forehead was pronounced, its head had a rounded point at the top, and the ears were not visible. It had a very wide nose and pronounced mouth. It was a terrifying sight. There was also a very strong odor of wet dog or wet bear mixed with the rotting flesh. It was a terrible smell Ernie will never forget. Ernie quickly threw together his equipment and put it on his ATV and got out of there. These two encounters have permanently changed Ernie's life. He doesn't enjoy camping like he used to, and when he's out there, he wakes up and hears every noise or twig snap. The creature that stared him down did not look friendly, and Ernie considers anyone that has had a Bigfoot encounter that is able to talk about it very lucky to be alive. I hope you guys enjoyed these Bigfoot encounters out of the Yukon. Keep on watching. We're going to keep on squatching.